Thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Wilson.
And I'm Chris Emke.
And I'm Alex Hogue.
And you're listening to Diesel Performance Podcast. Guys, today we are going to dive into the history of the 2.8-liter LWN Duramax. We'll talk about the background of it, the build of it, and we'll even get into some of the upgrades. I'm pretty excited to do this today.
Yeah, I can't wait for you to teach us a little bit about this, Paul.
I'll tell you what, I actually, this is one of the few episodes that I've had to put in like actual research hours on. We've done other history of episodes, and those people always we get a lot of good feedback about them. People always seem to really like them.
This is probably one of the first like research-esque style like history episodes that we've done where we've been around for the platform since its inception and its growth.
Yeah.
You know, all the other engines, I mean, they were out either A, before we were born, or B, before we got into diesel, right? So, you know, I remember when the first 2016, it was a green four-door short bed truck came to our shop for some R&D. And
That's right.
Not so long after, we ended up getting ours.
So. Yeah. So it's been fun to see the 2.8 liter. It's something I think the three of us all have some experience driving and being around and helping with tuning and turbo installation and things like that. So you're right. Yeah, this is a pretty unique one. And there is actually a surprising amount of good content out there to research about the history. Way back in the day, I was privileged to be able to interview Nicola Menarini, who was a chief engineer of that platform. Yep. So we'll get into that. We'll talk a little bit about that. Before we dive in, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, of course, Exergy Performance, the absolute leaders in common rail fuel injection systems. Yeah. So if you need injectors, pumps, lines, crossover tubes, whatever it is, fuel additive,
right?
If you're thinking about your common rail fuel system, you're thinking about Exergy Performance.
Yeah. And WC Fab, your one-stop shop for honestly, anything crazy that you want to modify under the hood of a truck. If I have a bone stock, Ford, if I have a bone stock Chevy, if I have a bone stock Ram, and I want to personalize it and I really want to make it my own, you got to go check over at WC Fab. You could do any color under the sun. You can literally color code your intercooler piping to your coolant pipes to your coolant reservoir. They do brake reservoir covers like traction bars. They have grill inserts for some trucks to match. Like you could get pretty wild and really make your truck a one of a kind. So, check them out for any of your modification needs.
XDP, your one-stop shop for power and performance. They're based out of New Jersey. They service the entire country. We've worked with XDP for a long time. When you call over there and you work with the guys, you're going to deal with somebody who's knowledgeable and has access to pretty much anything under the sun when it comes to your diesel pickup truck.
Yeah. And then last, Calibrated Power Solutions. Paul, that's where we work, right? So we're blessed to, have pretty good employment over the years doing what we love. But, anything common rail tuning-wise, emissions equipped, that's what, Calibrated Power is all about. And then they have the Stealth branded turbo line for a bunch of different trucks for drop-in chargers to get your truck to the next level.
Absolutely. Well said. All right. Diving into the history of the LWN, the 2.8-liter Duramax. Now, this is the 4-cylinder Duramax. Do you remember, what was the size of that F-150 that came out in a diesel? Was that a 3-liter?
I think that was a 3-liter.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. That ran for a short time. Yeah. Alex, have you ever come across any customers with a 3-liter F-150
Never.
diesel?
Not once.
Very rare. We had one for a short time.
We did.
I got to drive it and take some pictures of it, and it reminded me of the Cruise platform. Really, really cool for a super small niche group of people, and it just never took off. The 2.8 liter, on the other hand, really took this market by storm.
It's crazy because internally for what we do, Paul, over at Calibrated, we could almost profile these individuals that had these trucks. And if you remember, we'll go down a trip down memory lane. The 2.8 was actually, from what I remember, was supposed to be released like a year or two prior, about a year prior, and it was delayed because of the Volkswagen scandal. Yeah. Right? So now the 2.8 starts to come out, fall of 2015, and you're seeing a lot of people that, the 2.8 fit like two different markets. It was the guy that had the Volkswagen that was doing the buyback, and they're like, oh, shit, what's the new hot ticket? The 2.8. And they were able to get a little bit bigger vehicle that still got really respectable economy and had really decent driving characteristics, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the other guy who loved diesel, always had a pickup truck, but never needed a full-size pickup truck. Well, the 2.8 kind of bridged that gap because it had some of the same towing capacity as some of the half tons on the market at that time, and it was diesel.
That's right.
So it was really cool to see. And, it was one of those, Paul, we've been over at Calibrated to handle a lot of product releases, a lot of platform support releases. The 2.8 in my mind over the last decade has been one of the more popular, just hit the boots running type of platform to start supporting.
It really, really was. And we did find that these owners generally, and I am going to paint with a pretty broad brush here, generally are very, very detail orientated, really into the stats and the specs, really into reading instructions and things like that. I'm not saying that sarcastically. They are the type of guy
and it's not a bad thing.
Who read their owner's manual when they bought the vehicle, which if you're that guy, be proud of it, right? We love that. So those guys already know that this is an i4 four-cylinder layout, or an inline four, whatever you want to call it. It is a variant of the XLD in the non-U.S. and Canada market. So if you're talking about Europe, they've actually had this basic blueprint, this platform for a long time.
I mean, these engines have been in the Trailblazer and the Colorados overseas, Australia, New Zealand, since I want to say it was like 2013, 2014. So, we had seen that those vehicles were out and about for several years, overseas before it came domestic.
That's right. Yeah. So they've been manufactured in Thailand for a long time. That's a great point. It's a variant of the XLD, or I'm sorry, it's based on the VM Motari A428. So that's just what the engine is. GM bought Motari.
So when you see and do Googling, right, because that's what we used to do.
Yeah.
We'd go on Google and be like, oh, look at these badass little regular cab drag trucks, banging limiter, blowing smoke. That was that Motari engine platform that was the later predecessor into where we're at now.
That's right. Absolutely. So once GM bought them, they brought them on. They developed them to come over to the U.S. market. Like Chris said, late 2015, you could buy a model 2016, model year 2016. They've always been rated at 181 horsepower and 369 foot-pounds. So 16, it's now 23. So they've been out for like 7 years. Yep. They've never changed the horsepower rating. I can't think of a single other Duramax platform that has run that time span without any power increases.
What I think is really unique with the 2.8 is, it's been the same control modules, right?
Yeah.
It's been the same turbocharger.
Yep.
The only thing that I'm aware of that's changed, like the operating systems have changed, throughout the years. But the injector actually changed. So 16 to 18 is one injector, and then 19 plus is a different style injector. And I can only believe that it has to do with emission standards. It's the only thing that makes logical sense in my head. But, it is unique. I mean, they never changed the LWN nomenclature, right, of that engine. They never, changed any of that stuff up. But I guess, then again, what do they compete against?
When you say it's different, is it different the way like an LBZ and an LMM injector are different, but like
no,
the connectors and pigtails
you can't
are really
physically put, we've had to experience this with customers and, just kind of like the early stages of this. You couldn't buy a set of injectors and be sent an 18 injector and stick it in a 19. They physically will not install.
Really?
So they are different. The profiles are different.
Okay.
So, that was one thing that I thought was interesting. But, the one thing when we think of the big three, you think of Ford GM Ram and you think of 25, 3500s, and they're always in this horsepower and torque and towing capacity war. Who did the LWN have to compete against? Like, as a small mini pickup truck goes, there was nothing diesel in its class. It wasn't until several years later, the F-150, the 3-liter Power Stroke, and then several years after
which is a much larger truck.
Much larger truck. Right? It's still not a mini truck, right?
Yeah.
You're talking a half ton. So there was never anything in its class to compete against. And I have a bone to pick with GM. How come we never got a diesel Trailblazer? Like, that'd be super wicked.
Yeah, that would be sick.
That would be so much fun. Like, why didn't we get that? So, it's interesting to see, like to your point, Paul, oh, well, the horsepower and torque never increased, but did it need to? Was there a demand?
Well,
who are they competing against?
Well, this is what I've found to be surprising about the 3-liter 1500 that's out. That now they're putting that 3-liter into the Suburbans and the Escalades and things like that. So they're starting to expand into that market. I would love, and maybe that's what we need to do, is reach out to GM and get an engineer, get somebody from the program in board and say, okay, why not stick the 2.8 liter in that, or why not put the 3-liter in this? The cubic inch isn't that far off.
No, it's not.
Clearly, one thing could be like you could re-engineer it to use one engine. So what's the benefit? Now, we've heard a lot of rumors about this 2.8 liter going away. I don't know if we've had anything official from GM.
Gone.
It's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. 23. It's a turbo gas engine.
That's it.
It's a 2.7 turbocharged gas. So the 2.8 died in 22. If I'm accurate with that.
Okay,
so yeah, there is that. Like the 2.8 is dead. Now they're starting to push more of turbocharged gas engines. You see the 3 liter in the Suburban. I'm wondering if it's not a fitment thing. Because the Colorado Canyon, like it is a small truck and it is a small engine bay.
Sure.
When you look at, the half ton and you look at like a Suburban, like there is physically more room in the engine. You're talking an inline 6 versus an inline 4. I mean, there's a lot more length there that gets taken up with the 2 extra cylinders.
Absolutely.
And in addition to that, Chris, too, my first time driving experience was with the 2.8. Right out the bat, I was like, oh, this feels like a 2004 Ford Ranger. Like you got that, it's the same ride height. It's that same sort of feeling of a small, late 90s, early 2000s, truck.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. It is. It is a very different experience driving the Colorado compared to the 1500.
Yeah, you drive a 1500. I mean, Alex, you were part of the video that we did a few months back that, Justin did for us. And it was kind of like the release of, the 3 liter support that we offered. You get into a 3 liter, like the ride plushiness is a lot more forgiving than a 3/4 or a 1 ton. But don't let that fool you. Like the truck itself is the same size as a 3/4 or a 1 ton, depending on configuration. So, the only time you're going to get that micro truck feeling is going to be in a Colorado Canyon style truck.
And they are so light.
They are.
They're
very nimble.
fun to drive.
They are. They're so much fun.
Yeah, I've been caught on a couple of back roads going faster than I should, trying to hit those curves.
I remember we had a twin turbo truck for a while. It was an R&D test joint effort with WC Fab and us.
Yeah.
And I remember I had to take a trip down to Worley one day, and it's a lot of back roads from here to WC Fab, and it was a twin turbo, it was a white crew cab truck, real cool truck, and going on the back road, I'm like, man, this thing really's got some good pep. Look down, doing 90. I'm like, okay, this is effortless. They just wanted to go.
It was, as we were talking about, it's the first 4-cylinder diesel that GM's offered, at least in the U.S. market.
Well, in the truck world, right? Because you have the Cruise. That was a 4-cylinder too.
That was. So you're right. I'm sorry. First one in a truck.
Okay. I just like when you admit I'm right.
Awesome. It will never happen again. It got started to expand into the vans. Remember when they first came out in the Savannah vans?
Yeah.
And it was like the work van only. You could get it in a diesel. We still see a few of them on the road today. Have you come across dealing with any of those customers, Alex?
Never.
Okay.
They're few and far between. The one thing that I will say in regards to this conversation, to loop it back a little bit, what we are seeing is a lot of these 2.8 owners are trading up for the 3 liters now. And kind of like what we were saying, there's 2 types of owners for them. You've got the ones that are completely by the book, all about the numbers and love these trucks. And then you got the other guys who, probably a little bit older, probably always had trucks, never had a need, had the 2.8s, loved them, next thing's out. Now they're going for 3 liters.
Well, I think the 2.8, it held a really unique market, right? Like, I don't know if the S10 crowd really gravitated towards a diesel mini truck.
Yeah.
Right? Like that wasn't the demographic. The demographic was, I'm a diesel-oriented individual, I love mileage. And you really saw, I own a big truck, no longer need it. Or, again, I had a TDI, I had a Chevy Cruze diesel, I had some type of fuel savings diesel car, and the truck kind of bridged that gap. And to your point, for the guys that had a 16 or a 17 2.8, where do you go from here, right? Like if you wanted to buy a new truck in the year of 23, you don't have that platform as an option. So naturally you're going to go into, like one of the 3 liters.
Well, I think the price point jump too to go to anything larger is pretty significant.
It's significant.
Right?
The other thing I think of is I have had the luxury, and I'm very thankful for being able to tow with both a 3 liter and with a 2.8, right? So we talk about displacement in the engine and the spacing and the sizing, which are all great questions, and I would love to get those questions answered. I can tell you that a 2.8, that 2.8's got some spunk to it. Like I could probably hook up, 7,000 pounds behind me and do what I need to do. I've had 5,000, 6,000 pounds behind me, and it's done the job well.
How does it stop?
So that's kind of where I'm baiting into this, right? So going over bumps and the trailer, the tongue of the trailer moving the ass end, it's a very soft ass end in one of those, right? The suspension's just very light. When you get underneath and look at a Colorado or Canyon, the frame is very small. It's very dainty. So the stability with that load is not really supported well. Now, you get into a 3-liter, right? The 1,500 half ton I've had the luxury of towing 7,500 pounds with that truck. And it does it well. Like, stability-wise, it's there. The braking is there. The only thing I'll say is go over a bump or kind of take a turn, and the rear end of that truck just wants to go. It's not planted like a 25 or a 3,500.
Yeah.
So, that's where I would say, like, the 1,500 really does bridge that gap where, to Alex's point, you could see kind of the people gravitate, guys gravitate towards that over, sticking with a gas engine or, the full-size truck.
That makes sense. Now, this is the cleanest emissions diesel ever produced by GM in 2016. Yeah. So you're right. We did have some cruise stuff out there. Cruise diesels didn't last that long.
And I wonder why that is the cleanest emission diesel ever produced by GM at that point. And again, I keep thinking back memory lane, and there was a delay with this truck going to market because of the VW stuff.
Yeah.
And then if you recall, when those trucks first were released, there were trucks that were going in for 2 or 3 recalls a year with GM updates, which we all knew were to get better control over the emissions controls of these trucks.
That's right.
So
that's right. So injection system, it's funny we bring this up too, because as you look at this, GM had already had a chance to learn about diesel emissions and diesel emissions control through the LML platform.
Yep.
Right? I mean, your LML had already been out with Tier 4 emissions. They got urea, they got SCR, DOC, DPF, EGR, the whole shebang, all the alphabet. And so they had already kind of seen, hey, this works, this doesn't work, and then once you smash that down into a smaller platform, it becomes harder to control. Right. Your operating range is much more narrow once you're into this. And one of the advantages that these trucks had was matching it with the GM Hydromatic 6L50 transmission. Well-known transmission, to be reliable. Honestly, we've beaten the shit out of these transmissions.
Now, be careful, because if you have a 2.8 guy that's listening to this, he might give you a run for your money and say otherwise. The 6L50 trans is a good trans.
Yeah.
The question and the issues that we've seen over the years has to do with the torque converter.
There you go.
And running into torque converter issues. So it sucks because a lot of end users will group the trans as being a pile of shit when it was the converter that was potentially the culprit.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because, throughout the years, we've tuned a lot of these trucks. Like, no exaggeration, probably it's up there in platform as far as support that we've had. And it's not common. It's not as common as a lot of people think to have these transmissions fail prematurely. To your point, like our test truck, that thing had multiple turbo configurations on there. We towed, drag strip, dyno pulls. That thing has, to this day, the original trans and the original, converter in that truck.
Yeah.
We've had customers come in here with, 250,000 miles, stock everything, stock trans, stock converter. So it stinks because then in the next breath, I've had customers that have 40,000 miles on their trucks and they've had 2 converters in there already.
Right. I do always wonder, because I've launched our 2.8 liter. I mean, not real hard. It's emissions equipped. Yeah. It's a 2.8. What am I going to build 20 pounds of boost at the line?
Probably.
But I've launched. I've launched it.
4-wheel drive
burnouts. Not in that truck. But I have launched it at like 10, 15 PSI to really kind of see, hey, can it take it? I mean, usually it'd probably be recommended to like kick off around 5 PSI is probably all you really need to build. But it's always handled it. And running down some of the back roads we're talking about, I mean, I've been on and off that throttle about as hard as I could. And again, it's taken the abuse and it shifts smooth to this day.
Yeah.
When we do trans service or anything like that, we take a look at it, we can't find any indication of failure in it. And so that's good, man. I mean, I don't think a lot of these trucks are getting worked quite as hard as we're kicking the shit out of ours.
No, I don't think. I mean, it's a commuter truck at the end of the day, right? Like, that's what it's designed for, and I think that's what its main application is going to be used for. But I like to your point. Yeah, I would say, between the different turbo configurations, we've had probably 5 or 6 on that truck throughout the years.
Yeah.
And that truck's, seen a host of different workloads. So I would say if there was going to be a failure, it'd be there.
Speaking of turbochargers, that is one of the common failure points in these trucks. And it's not necessarily the entire turbo exploding.
It's an abnormal failure. Like it's not what we're used to in the bigger diesel pickup truck arena, where the turbochargers bend fins. Like they physically deteriorate or bend the compressor fin. And when you look at the turbocharger, they are brittle. They are small. The blades are very thin. In the engines, they tend to like to recirculate a little bit of oil, through the crankcase ventilation. So that all gets re-ingested back into the inlet of the turbocharger, where, it's real common to find the 2.8 guys, they'll put like catch cans, on the truck to kind of help filter some of that. But I would say, we offer the drop-in turbo over at Calibrated, DT44. It's been very popular for us. But a lot of the replacements aren't necessarily because guys are looking for more power. It has to do with the fact that, the compressor fins are bending or prematurely failing, and that's where some of those downfalls come in.
That's right, yeah. Alex, you want to walk us through some of the specs of this engine?
Yeah, I would love to here. Like Chris was saying, in addition, stock, these things will only make 181 horsepower. But in addition to that, it's an iron block cylinder, aluminum dual overhead cams, forged steel crankshaft, connecting rods. In addition to that, 16-to-1 compression ratio, which I think for one of these smaller trucks is a big thing to bring up on why they're so good with their fuel economy.
Walk me through that. Why does 16.5-to-1 compression ratio help with fuel economy?
So with a higher compression ratio like that, you're burning off fuel more evenly. You're getting less, that's building up on your cylinder heads. You're getting less that's coming out of the crankcase vent. You're getting all of these factors when you have that. And again, too, kind of like what we were talking about with how to get 30 miles per gallon with a diesel. If you're at the right RPMs, 2,000, 1,500, doing 60, 65 miles an hour, back roads, highway driving, that is going to play into that here as well to get you those sorts of numbers, and why this is a really strong, simple engine.
Yeah, they really did think this one through, and that's one of the things that I think about it being based off of a platform that has already existed for a while. Right. Is they've been able to learn some stuff about this. Like it's interesting too. Some of the indications that I don't think I realized in 2016 when they came out. It had a Denso high pressure pump that wasn't normal for GM.
Not for us.
Look at what came out in the L5P.
Right.
It had solenoid type injectors. Keep in mind, your LMLs had piezo based injectors, so a different style of controlling the fuel delivery system, right, inside of the injector. So they had gone, solenoid is what Duramaxes had run on forever. LML came out, they went to piezo. The theory there was that it would be able to open and close the injector faster. It's essentially what piezo came down to. And then move back to the solenoid type. I wonder if that's a reliability issue, because we saw that also the same, again, Denso pump, solenoid type injectors, those were some of the major changes from the LML to the L5P.
But you also see, we've had Extra G on in the past, and it's not uncommon to see a piezo injector go a little further in mileage compared to a solenoid-based injector. Yeah. So I wonder what that change was. Like, was it a political thing where, hey, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, we're going to get these injectors in this motor? Was it hey, this is a better design because of a control perspective? It's interesting to see. The one thing that we can all agree on is, as these injectors have been produced in these newer engines, the stock injector has the capabilities of being turned up to support more power than what it replaced in the past.
Yeah, we continuously are seeing an increase in common rail pressure. Yep. So the actual pressure running through the common rail, the actual pressure that the injector is spraying at, those two numbers keep climbing up in an effort to increase atomization. So what you want to see is your fuel turned to complete mist. Yep. It needs to burn evenly. It needs to be spread out across the entire cylinder at the same density of fuel to air across the whole cylinder. And then once that compresses, that's going to give you a really, really clean burn. Anytime you have pockets or or a lower rate of atomization, you're going to get more smoke, and that's obviously going to be bad for your emissions, equipment, for your fuel mileage, all those things. So I think somebody once told me that the only reason the only reason that the OEMs have ever gotten better about making diesels is for more horsepower to piss off the competitors, or for better emissions equipment to appease the government. Yeah. And I'm like, man, that
makes sense.
Sounds like the two driving forces.
Check.
Yeah. Now, the ceramic glow plugs for shorter heat up times and higher glow temperatures, I thought that was an interesting change as well. That's like one of those small things that I think speaks to the level of detail thought that they put into this. We know that your vehicle makes the highest amount of emissions. The worst emissions will come out when your vehicle's cold. So everything designed in newer trucks nowadays is to get your truck up to temp as quickly as possible, and that's going to be better for treating the exhaust gas.
Well, I think too, you think of, go try to do a cold start in our cold climate, in our cold areas with a LB7 or an LLY, and then do that same cold start in an LML or a 2.8, right? Like, it's a lot more effortless to be able to get one of the newer platforms because of the technology, because of that heat up and things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things is they do a balance shaft that contributes to smoothness in what drives the oil pump. The engine itself and the harmonics are very smooth, very solid. Like, once again,
which has been a big flaw in 4-cylinder diesels. That's one of the reasons that a lot of guys haven't got into them, is they're so noisy.
They're very, very noisy, clattery.
Because it's hard to keep them
and
balanced.
You can physically see the engine shake as it's idling.
Yeah.
And the 2.8, I just think, yes, it's loud, it's chattery, right? It's a 4-cylinder, right? But in its own right, it is smooth and very harmonic in its own operation.
Yeah. Go line it up next to a 4-cylinder Cummins, right? Like one of the little ones here. It's a night and day difference. Biodiesel compatible, B20 compatible. Yeah. I thought that's pretty much standard now, I know, in diesels.
It has to be.
It
has to be.
But still, I think it was one of those of them engineering for every possibility. We did a huge a month on biodiesel fuel in general and interviewed a ton of people in the biodiesel world. If you're interested, go back, check out those episodes. Man, Chris, what we never did was we never did pour that bottle of vegetable oil into somebody's fuel tank. We're still waiting to do that. I remember that guy told us we should do that.
Yeah, we should.
One of these days.
Yep.
We'll do it to your truck. All right. NVH. So that's what we were just talking about. NVH, noise, vibration, harshness, I believe is what NVH is. So a lot of things were built around this vehicle with NVH in mind, trying to keep it quiet, trying to keep it what I would call, and I don't mean this to be a derogatory term, but what I would call wife friendly. Yeah. Right? It's like you should be able to throw anybody in it and they enjoy driving it. And I definitely think that they've achieved that. Garrett ball bearing VGT turbocharger. Pretty standard for GM. It's smaller. We talked about the compressor wheel.
The compressor.
Yeah. It's definitely a basic flaw there.
Now, one of the things that's unique is the dual overhead camshafts. A lot of the diesel engines in today's market, in the bigger trucks, they're not an overhead cam. Now you get into some of the smaller 4-cylinder diesel stuff that's out there. It's going to be a dual overhead cam, but the Cummins, the Duramax, the Power Stroke, those are not dual overhead cam or overhead cam in general. So I thought that was interesting. And then the 4 valves per cylinder. Now we've seen, it's pretty much a standard to have 4 valves per cylinder in a diesel. You haven't seen 2 valves per cylinder. Shoot, man, I might shoot myself in the foot here, but since like a 12 valve Cummins, right?
I think you're right.
Which the 24 valve, again, emission standard 101, kind of improve on the efficiency and stuff like that. And then the emissions controls. So, to your point, Paul, it's like that tier 4 final tier emission standard. You have DOC, you have SCR, you have DPF, you have EGR, you have PCV, you have all of it. All of it.
The whole alphabet, baby. Got it.
The whole 9, man. You got it all. Now, some of the cool things with the 2.8 that, you don't really think of, right? When I think of, I'm going to buy a mini truck, call it a mini truck. It is what it is. They offered exhaust braking.
Yeah, I kind of scoffed when I first saw this spec, and I remember 2.8 tuning customers asking about the exhaust brake, and I'm like, you're never gonna need it. Yeah. Like you're gonna throw at the most 5 bags of mulch in the bed, and that's about what you're gonna haul, and that's fine. That's more than what I haul. So I'm totally cool with it. So but yeah, it does have it. I can tell you from my experience, and maybe this is just being spoiled by full-size trucks, but I've never noticed it when I was driving.
I think I felt it once.
Yeah. That's So it's there.
It's there.
It's on the spec sheet.
There's a button you can hit.
There is, right.
Yeah.
Do I feel it or notice? I don't know.
So when the button turns yellow, it's on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But do I feel it?
But
was
it's
my
on.
question. You feel through your eyes. Okay, got it.
Feel with your eyes, man. Feel with your eyes.
Integrated trailer brake, again, kind of the assumption you're going to be towing.
But that's like a standard with all the new trucks, you know?
It's your by the time you hit 2016, why would you buy something that has a pickup bed and not have trailer brakes integrated? It's a hard one for me to understand.
It's crazy to think of like an 01 to like 10 era truck.
Yeah.
You would have 2 screws going into the kick panel and you had a brake controller chilling with some wires.
Yes.
That goes away in 2011, my friend.
That nobody but you knew how to actually get it to work right.
I don't even think I knew how to act. Yeah. 100%.
Yes. Yeah. No. Well, I also remember getting in company trucks that had those stupid trailer brake modules, and I go to hit the brakes with a trailer on, and I'm like, is it off? Like, who would turn this off? Like, why would you turn this off? So I've had some frustration there. 6L50, 6-speed automatic transmission. We mentioned that before. Centrifugal? Anybody?
Centrifugal.
I believe Chris is right on that one.
Centrifugal. Not the way that's spelled in English. Pendulum vibration absorber. You can tell I know what the fuck this is.
Yeah, 100%.
You can tell I deal with this. I never deal with
It's
this.
like
I didn't even know it existed. This is clearly me copying and pasting somebody else's words so I can understand it.
This works with the Canuter valve for the blinker fluid.
Oh, got it.
There you go.
Perfect. It is to reduce noise and vibration. So it's an NVH initiative.
And then they pair it with a 342 gear, which just means it's going to do awesome on the highway.
That's really, I remember, I think Nick, when he first got his, everybody was asking what kind of fuel mileage, and he wrote up something that was like, listen, I was drafting a semi on a 2-lane highway at 58 miles an hour, and I got exactly 40 miles to the gallon. I don't know that it'll ever do better, and I don't care if it does or doesn't. No. Like, that's about, 40 miles to the gallon, even in a mini truck, it's like, that's still fucking awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Upgrades. Chris, this is probably where you know the most.
This is the shameless plug. We get to highlight our calibrated power catalog.
And it's not just us. I got some other things on here.
A couple I'm going to disagree with too from end user experience.
Okay.
So we're gonna.
Well, let's start with number one. The first thing you should do if you want to get more out of your vehicle.
It's tuning, without a doubt. And I'm not just saying that because I work over at Calibrated. That is going to physically be the best bang for your buck, where you can take X amount of money, invest it into programming, and you are physically going to get something out of it as a improvement to how the truck currently operates.
No better dollar per horsepower.
Not at all.
If you actually sit down and do the math, it's the cheapest thing you could do to your truck to get the most out of it.
I would just say dollar per experience. You can't put $1 on that experience altogether, because that is single-handedly what's going to shape the outcome of how the truck operates.
Especially on these trucks. The first time I drove one stock, I think we did a video of it of me and Nick for the podcast. So there's probably a podcast episode you guys could listen to as well. I drove it stock, and then he flashed it. And I was like, man, it felt stock. It felt like there was a tennis ball under the gas pedal. Yeah. Like you've
been using that term for like 9 years. I am annoyed to this day, but yes,
it's so accurate.
100%.
It's so exactly what was going on. I hate you. All right, number 2, Alex. What was number 2 on the list?
It's going to be an S&B intake. By far for the 2.8s, it's the best one I've ever seen on them. Again, first impressions, we've tuned a lot of these 2.8s in-house. The 2 biggest things that they get is tuning and an intake. And then usually about 3 to 6 months later, they're going to come back for a turbo or ask, hey, what else can I do to this to get more out of it?
So what are your thoughts on cold air intakes on these trucks?
So against a lot of the bigger trucks, like the factory airbox is fairly restrictive. We've done a bunch of testing on this in the past. You legitimately can put a tune on a truck, put it in the biggest power level, run it, swap intakes, and you will see a difference with intake air temps, which is essentially letting the turbocharger operate a little bit more efficiently, for one. Yep. 2, we are going to see a little bit of a broader power band in the mid RPM window because the turbo isn't sucking air as aggressively. So it is a smart move. Like it really is, for what an S&B air intake is, there's other options on the market, right? We're not going to just say, hey, it's got to be this intake.
Yeah.
But an air intake on a tuned 2.8 is going to benefit you in more ways than one. And yes, it's not going to gain the type of power that the tuner is, but it's also not coming at the same price point as what the tuner is either.
right,
So
yeah.
it's a really nice combo.
$300-$400 put you in the ballpark. I mean, you could shop around at that price too.
Exactly.
Like you said, I mean, I wrote S&B on here. That's just the intakes that we have on the shelf. I'll tell you, if Whirly makes an intake for these, I'd take a Whirly intake over it, just because I would like it to be powder coating and functional. So like I would like the best of both worlds. You're gonna spend a little bit more money on that and have a little bit longer of a wait time, but I think you're gonna be happier at the end of the day. Number 3, Chris, what do we got up there?
So for 3, you put an edge in sight, right? Rightfully so. We deal with them on the bigger trucks. It's
wouldn't list number 3 as an edge insight on a 6.6 liter. I would only list it as number 3 on a 2.8 liter, but please go ahead.
So I do think gauges are important, especially depending on how you're going to be using the truck, especially considering that the 2.8 crowd are a little bit more analytical.
Yes,
right?
that's why.
But the Edge, in all honesty, and it really pains me to say this because the Edge is by far one of my favorite monitoring systems, it really doesn't cater to the 2.8 crowd all that well.
Yeah.
So as much as it hurts to say that the iDash from Banks is actually going to be a little bit more of a universal tool that's going to give a 2.8 owner a little bit more versatility to monitor engine PIDs.
I don't disagree. If you're willing to make the investment to get the expansion modules and run everything that you need for it.
There's nothing against the Banks. It's
the
hardware is a little more on the dated side compared to the Edge. I like the Edge, features. I like the display more. I like the size of the screen more than I like the iDash. The iDash is just a little bit smaller, a little bit more harder to read in that sense. But
it's essentially the difference between analog and digital.
Correct. But the functionality of the Banks is going to be more in tune with a 2.8 guy.
I agree.
Out.
I wholeheartedly agree with this, by the way, which pains me to say. Yep. But yes, no, you're absolutely right. I will say that the Edge, the easy installation, if you're cool with getting like 80% of the data.
Oh, then it's Edge all day long.
The Edge all day long. If you are obsessed and you want to know every detail.
You want to be able to monitor factory EGT sensors. The Edge won't. The Banks will.
Right.
Manual regens, I believe the Banks can do and the Edge won't on those. So it's just, there's these little things. Like when I would recommend an Edge to a 2.8 guy or to anybody, it can do all these things, but can it do this? No. But this hardware can. Okay, well, then that's why I want for that one function.
Right.
It doesn't matter that it's harder to look at. It doesn't matter if it's harder to set up. It doesn't matter if it's not as aesthetically pleasing. It has that one option that the other one doesn't. That's why I want to go with it.
That's 100% accurate. And also, usually I tell guys with larger trucks, if I'm talking to them about it, I'm like, are you going to like actually analyze your data?
Yeah.
Are you going to stop when the warning light blinks because your EGTs are too high? Are you the guy who's going to pull over and care about that? Okay, go with the gauges. Right. If you're a guy who says the easiest way to fix high EGTs is turn off your EGT PID,
it doesn't matter.
You don't need it. I've never met a 2.8 liter guy who would say that.
No.
So that's where this rank 3.
Now, number 4.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to switch things up. It is very common in the 2.8 world from a reliability perspective to add a catch can into the mix.
You're not wrong.
It's not something that we've had on our site. It's not something that we actively sell, but it is something that I see 2.8 owners actively investing into based on what they read on the forums and what their buddies are into and that kind of thing. That is going to help aid to improve turbocharger health. So, as we are talking about the 5th recommendation, which is our turbo, the DT44, I try to tell guys like, hey, an S&B intake, right? The intake is smart to pair. I would prefer to pair it with than put that turbo on a stock intake, right? But adding a catch can into the mix, it's added complexity to the install, but it's also going to help with, how that engine breathes and what's getting ingested back into the motor and the turbo health altogether. So
that's right. Alex, did you do a little research on some of the highest horsepower 2.8s out there? What'd you find?
Actually, yeah. The one that I found at least recorded was a 460 horsepower build by Jags Pro Truck Performance in Zimmerman, Michigan.
Oh, we know Jags. Yeah, we've had them on the show. They've competed in UCC. Good guys.
This build was insane. Front to back, the first thing that they ended up doing for it, Screaming Diesel compound kit set up for a 2.8, which I didn't even know existed before doing a little bit of research on this.
It was a big splash when it came out.
So they did that, doing injectors, everything that you could think of on the surface level for these modifications. They were getting close. I think they were in the 350, 380 range on their dyno. All of a sudden, you can pretty much see it from what they're writing is, rods are completely twisted up after this run. Ended up getting a whole new block from GM, rebuilt this thing up to the ground up to what it is today. And I think that's really cool because, one, somebody had the dedication to blow up a 2.8 motor just to see how they could make it better.
And we've seen, we've seen that. There's kind of been this unspoken rule here at Calibrated, like you don't take a 3 liter or a 2.8 liter past 300 horsepower, right?
Yeah.
300 is kind of like your limit, and it's more of a torque thing, not a horsepower thing. But with horsepower comes torque. So it's always been kind of like this nice combo, like DT44 intake and a tune, you could make 280 horsepower. You're just below the threshold of that 300, and whatever that torque output comes out to, because of how quickly the torque ramps up, is mainly what you want to steer away from.
Yeah.
But we saw something similar with the twin turbo truck that WC Fab did years ago. Plucked a rod out the side of the block, and the rest was history. So I remember making one of the first calls over to SoCal about their joint venture with Carrillo on getting a set of rods, and I think to this day we still have a set of rods floating around somewhere for a 2.8.
There's just a box down in the shop on somebody's shelf,
and it's just not accounted for. I already know it. Like, we find random stuff in the shop from day to day from the moves and stuff like that. So we have a set of rods floating around. I know that for certain.
That's it. Call Chris, extension 2121. Go ahead, get those ordered. We'll be moving them.
6 to 8 week lead times. We can't find them.
Yeah. Man, that's a lot of 2.8 liter stuff. We haven't really talked too much about the 2.8 in a while.
No, it's nice to kind of revisit that. I mean, it's I get so caught up in all the newer platforms and all the cool stuff that we have going on that you kind of take for granted. I mean, it's still a very popular platform. We do a ton with it. But just to go in depth and talk about it, something that it's nice to kind of revisit.
Absolutely. Well, guys, for today, this has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Hemke.
And I'm Alex Ogg.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us today, guys. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Hemke.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon. So you're right. I'm sorry. First one in a truck.
Okay. I just like when you admit I'm right.
Awesome. It will never happen again.